Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the place to find your next great rock and roll book or documentary. This is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends to you the good stuff. Like today's doc, about an artist that blew the door open for multiracial bands and created a sound that was a one-of-a-kind, and then he was gone. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. And today, the spotlight falls on the documentary Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius. That's a pretty heady title, and the documentary's director, Questlove, is out to prove both sides of it. Sly Lives speaks less to the fact that he's still around, and he's in his 80s now, but more to his lasting brilliance and his largely forgotten legacy. The burden of Black Genius part is something the doc looks at from many sides and shows how Sly Stone struggled with the weight of carrying a race and a movement. Questlove's documentary on Sly and the Family Stone offers a really captivating look at the rise and fall of one of the most influential music acts of the late 60s, early 70s. And he does a really interesting job of skillfully paralleling the band's rise with that of the country at the time. And he highlights how Sly, like America, shifted from an optimistic, upbeat vision to a more complicated, splintered reality. While showing both sides of the theme, Questlove portrays Sly's transformation from a promising, revolutionary figure who pushed musical boundaries to a troubled, isolated artist grappling with his own insecurities. In 1966, Sly formed Sly and the Family Stone. It was a biracial, mixed-gender band, came out of San Francisco, blending rock and pop and funk. He was a boundary-pushing artist that the mantle genius at the time, it definitely fit. Like they say in the film, without Sly, there would be no Prince. And one of the advantages of having a brilliant musician himself directing the doc, Questlove looks deeply at the music, especially when he gets a chance to break down some of Sly's iconic tracks. They found a real revealing studio outtake that highlighted how a track transformed from a soulful, slow kind of gospel ballad to the up-tempo juggernaut we know as Family Affair, which was actually, and this was really cool, that it was actually the first time to use a primitive take on a drum machine. This was a highlight, seeing songs dissected and broken down so you could get a real up-close look at how revolutionary Sly's talent was, especially at that time. Running side by side with Sly and the band's story, and there is a lot of deep emotional storytelling for most of the original band, that was a real bonus indeed, was the question of the burden of Black Genius. Questlove interviews a bunch of diverse talent, dive in on the subject. Vernon Reid, Andre 3000, D'Angelo, Nile Rodgers, George Clinton, all used their experience in the music industry to look at how Sly, who basically changed the landscape of music by inventing what became the template for so much of the music of the 70s, struggled with the weight of fame. This is what separates this doc from just a straightforward look at Sly's whole career. Veering off and exploring how Black artists feel this debt to where they were brought up, and how with the influx of money and fame kind of took them out of the neighborhood and lifestyle they grew up with, and how challenging it was to make sense of that, even for all the talent interviewed. Despite the deep and to me really interesting nature of the Black Genius question, Questlove skillfully navigates the delicate balance of critiquing Sly while providing context for his flaws. Starting in the late 60s, Sly emerged as this huge rock star of the moment. He revolutionized both a sound and an image, achieving the peak of a new kind of Black fame until, unfortunately, the only direction left for him was down, and fall he did pretty spectacularly. Great archival footage is used here and really personal interviews from the original band. It does a spectacular job of charting not only Sly's extraordinary success, but also his very extraordinary downfall. Sly became a prisoner of the expectations his success created. There are a bunch of candid interviews with people who are closest to him, and you see the more vulnerable side of Sly. It gets deep and ugly. George Clinton talks about how him and Sly became crack buddies. Sly's children share about his absence in their life, and the former band members give an insight into how Sly's increasingly erratic behavior was basically killing the band. And even though Sly didn't provide any interviews to this documentary, the film looks at how his success overwhelmed him without ignoring his unfortunate demise. And his demise pretty much took him out of the music business for the rest of his life. And Sly was starting to be known more for his drug-filled personal life than his musical contributions, which is really kind of sad. The doc definitely leans into this, but it doesn't go all the way. And I was okay with that. His challenges were acknowledged, and I don't think we really needed to see like the police rap sheet on Sly and go really deep into how far he fell. What Questlove did in this was he kind of positioned Sly's flaw with a wider turbulence of the culture and musical challenges at the time. And with that, I think he did it really, really well. It's a fairly sad ending to the story, but what I liked about the doc was the way it focuses on the whole story instead of a kind of rise and fall story that you usually get. With this doc, you get to see every side of this boundary-pushing artist, and you have a chance to witness the burden of genius that was not only thrust upon Sly, but also those who surrounded him. Sly Lives, The Burden of Black Genius, directed by Questlove, runs 1 hour and 52 minutes. Okay, let's look at the one big question I have about this doc after watching it. What is something that stands out? And with this film, we get a chance for a little head-to-head competition because Sly's memoir, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, came out last year. And some of you, I bet, have read it. I know I did. So that's today's one big question. How does this compare? Is this doc better than the book? I'm going to give you the answer to that after a huge announcement about the next great rock and roll book I'm going to be giving away. And this book is currently the best book released in 2025. Before I tell you what book I'm going to be giving away and how you can win it, I just want to give you a quick heads up on a few new titles that were just announced. There's a new Neil Young documentary coming out called Coastal, and the doc explores the day-to-day and behind-the-scenes details of Neil Young's 2023 tour. Right now, though, it's only going to be available one night only in theaters April 17th. We'll look forward to the streaming date of that one. And here's some really cool news, some book news from Paul McCartney. Paul's written another book. The last one was his kind of memoir. Remember that one, the incredible book Lyrics, which was, as well as being one of the highest recommended books I've ever spotlighted on the podcast, it was also the first podcast episode I ever released, December 2022. This new book covers the formation of Wings and looks at the band McCartney put together after the Beatles. The book's called Wings, the story of a band on the run, and it's set to release November 4. Okay, have I got you fired up about new titles? Have I got you fired up about the new book giveaway? I'm fired up about it because I get to mail someone the new Mike Campbell memoir, Heartbreaker. Any and all Tom Petty fans are going to love this book. So here's how you can get the new Mike Campbell book and the latest news in the world of rock and roll books and documentaries, and that is by signing up for the Rock Talk Studio Blast, which is entirely free. Right now, the subscription is totally free. I created the Blast to be something that serves as an up-to-date reference for all the latest rock and roll book and documentary news. It's a newsletter that comes out at the last Friday of the month, gives you everything you need to know to stay on top of the news, and it gives you entry into the Mike Campbell memoir giveaway. All you've got to do is send me an email at info@rocktalkstudio.com and say, Big Rick, send me that blast, and I'll hook you up. Okay, I owe you an answer to the one big question. Do I recommend the Sly Stone documentary or the book? Let's do it. I'm going to start with a Sly Stone book that came out last year. Again, it's called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. And I think it's pretty telling that I never did an episode about the book because it just didn't take me there. It just didn't have enough for me to want to come on the show and talk about it. I shifted my episodes and the way I did the shows from more of a ranking in the beginning to a recommendation. I just couldn't recommend the Sly book. It had some great moments. He's got a great story. He's got a very unique story, and it was written in his language. He has a ghostwriter there too, and it had kind of a slang language to it, which was different. It made it very unique in that sense, but it just didn't have a lot of depth. And it kind of ran out of gas as it progressed. Remember, his career was kind of short. The movie, though, the documentary side, that has a ton of depth, and it's full of insight, and it's full of questions. It makes you think, and visually it just worked. And on a deeper level and on a more entertaining level than the book ever did. If you read the book and you thought it was better than the doc, I would love to hear that side of the story. You can email me at the same email address as The Blast, info@rocktalkstudio.com. Let me know what you think. Was the book better than the doc? To me, I would highly recommend the documentary over the book. Before I wrap up today's show with a sneak peek at next week's Spotlight title, I want to give you a nod to a podcast that is featuring some major rock and roll talent. They've had Joe Bonamassa on the show, Billy Sheehan, the great bass player, has been on the show, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Lawrence Gowan, the lead singer of Styx, and me. Yes, I'm very grateful to say that I was asked to come on the My Weekly Mixtape podcast and put together a mixtape with host Brian Colburn. The theme of the show and the mixtape is number one hits of the 70s. And you know I did my best to represent the rockers that came out during that time. It was a fun show, and we went back and forth trying to come up with the ultimate jam about 70s hits. Here's a trailer to the show to give you a little more insight on the My Weekly Mixtape podcast.
What does the word mixtape mean to you?
It was an art form.
Trying to woo them with my fantastic and eclectic taste in music.
If somebody gave you a mixtape, you felt like you really meant something to that person.
Mixtape to me is love.
My Weekly Mixtape is a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Tune in to hear themed playlist curations.
No one in the history of anyone should ever put Pantera after Derek and the Dominoes, but here we are.
It is going to be the weirdest playlist ever created, and I love it.
One-on-one sit-downs with the artists that made our mixtape special in the first place.
It's Bill Gibson with Huey Lewis and the News.
I'm Art from the band Everclear.
This is Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
This is Frank Turner, and good Lord, you've made the right choice today.
And so much more. My Weekly Mixtape is a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Listen now at myweeklymixtape.com or by searching My Weekly Mixtape wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a listen to this great podcast and check out that 70s number one hits show and let me know how you think I did. Next week's show is featuring a book about one of rock's, and I would definitely say a top 5 best 4-piece band. And this book captures a historic run they did in San Francisco and the 500 pictures taken of the show and featured in the book. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll and being able to give you the scoop on a title I think is worth your time and money, like today's documentary, Sly Lives, a.k.a. The Burden of Black Genius. And if you want to get in on that Mike Campbell book, just shoot me over an email and I'll put the address in the show notes. Again, it's info@rocktalkstudio.com. All right, folks, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.